Well, hello quilty friends, and welcome back to my channel. It's so good to be back here filming, and what I wanted to show you today was this block as part of the Sweet Land sew along that's going on with my Americana fabric. Now I'm going to show you how to finish this block, but this is what the blocks look like. I have previous ones done. There's 5 of these blocks in the quilt, but this is just a really fun block that you could do alone if you didn't, if you want to make a pillow or a runner or something like that. So I wanted to hop on here and show you these blocks. So I'm just showing you, they're all the same block and they're all out of Americana fabric, but the fabric is in, different fabrics in each block. So they're scrappy, but all in the same colors, okay? So that's what the block looks like. And so I have these segments. It consists of 4 segments like this, okay? And these are 6.5 inch unfinished when you finish that segment. And then it's 4 segments like this right here. And these are 4.5 by 6.5 before you sew that into the block. And this is a 4.5 inch cut center square. And then of course here's the applique, which I showed you how to do last week on my blog, but I haven't applied the applique yet. And that's, if you're not doing the quilt and you want to just do this block, that can be optional as well. And so I'm just going to set that aside, and we can add that later when it comes time. But as far as the cutting goes, so here is the sew along guide. All right, and so for the cutting for this block is all in the guide. I'm going to try to hold this on an angle because it's kind of shiny with the lights I've got set up here. But see, you've got all of the cutting going on here. All right, and it tells you which fabric goes to what. And let me pull this out just so that you can see without the glare. Okay, so you're going to get that with every block, okay, in the sew along. And so it's a free PDF download, and you can go to my blog and get that. Of course, I'll leave the link here in the video as well. And so that's all the information about the quilt. But if you want the cutting for the block and other blocks and things like that, just go and to my blog, or go to the link in the description of this video and download the sew along guide. And so what I've got going on here is, like I say, the first block. Let me adjust this camera a little bit. I want to make sure that you can see the entire block. I've got lights set up all around my table here because I want to make sure you can see. So every once in a while I will try to adjust to make sure you can see what that looks like. And so what I've got going on here is this segment right here. Okay, I've got it all cut. This is what we're going to end up with. All right. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to sew these into a 4-patch. And then I'm going to add the easy corner triangle backgrounds onto them after. So first, let me sew this into a 4-patch real quick. And then we can, get going. So I have this set up in filming. Hope you can hear me talking over my machine. I have this set up like this in filming because obviously I've got just my phone, it's just me filming, and I want you to be able to see how I'm pressing and ironing, because I especially want to show you the construction of the block and how I press, because that's really an important part of getting an accurate block. And yes, I'm sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you all know where that is on your machines. And so what I'm going to do is just move this block in and out as I'm pressing. So what I do is I set my seams, and I press my seams open for accuracy. And so how I do that is I just open them up in the corner. I like to take my roller and just quickly roll that. And this is a flat roller, and it opens those seams up so that you can literally just put that iron on top. And I try not to iron back and forth. I really try to just press, okay? Then I take a clapper and I put it there and let it cool off, all right? And so that's what's going on with the clappers. And so then I'm just gonna bring this back over here and like this, and continue sewing it into a 4-patch. So I hope this setup works for you. I figured while I was at my machine, you really don't need to see me. I'm not doing anything super tricky. It's just literally sewing 1/4-inch seam allowance. And I'll show you what I did with this pin before I take it out, so you can see what's going on. I do use my Seam So Easy guide on my machine that looks like this. Okay, and when I'm doing a 1/4-inch seam allowance, let me grab a design board so you can see the lines on this. So for the 1/4-inch seam allowance is right here. So I just line this up using my washi tape. If you guys have seen me on all of my other piecing videos, then you know exactly how I do this. But I just use washi tape, tape it to my machine, line up this center line with the needle in my sewing machine, and that means that this is a 1/4-inch away from the needle, right? And so you just use your ruler, use the graph lines on the Seam So Easy guide, which is why I designed them that way, so you could line up that on each machine. And I just use a washi tape, and that's not permanent. It just doesn't leave a residue on your machine when you take it on and off. You can take it off to fill your bobbin. I don't need to on the featherweight because I have a side loading bobbin, but just whatever you need on your machine, it works great. And so I'm just following the 1/4-inch seam allowance, and when I'm doing easy corner triangles, why I have this out, I will show you that you follow the center line. Okay, I may bring the guide back in, not with the sewing machine obviously because I can't show you, but I may bring that back in to show you what I was talking about. Now I just out of habit took my pin out when I told you I wasn't going to, but here is my double pins. Okay, they now come in this cute little bee container and are a little bit shorter. But what I do when I'm lining up seams like this that I want, okay, yes, here we are. I have to rip out the seam again. But while I'm hurrying and doing this, then I'll let you know that when I'm lining up the seams, I use those double pins because they pin on either side. And it makes it so that your seams line up and they don't shift when it goes under your machine. So when you go to pin, a lot of times the pin itself will shift the fabric. But if you do it to where the fabric won't shift because there's a pin on each side, let me show you what I'm talking about. Now that I know which way I'm doing it, then I can actually show you how I pin because I had to. Okay, so here we go that way. Gonna press them flat again. Okay, so this is how I want to sew this. So I want to put those right there. I want to take this pin and pin on both sides of the seam, see? And I don't even go like this. I just poke it in so that those will not shift, so that when you start sewing, that is not gonna shift. Now it's thin enough that you can sew over it, or you can remove it right before you get there if you want to, but I usually just leave it in there, slow down and sew over it because, the whole point of it is I don't want any shifting. And so I don't want to take a chance of that shifting. So here we go. So now I just removed the pin right here. I'm going to put this back here just so you can kind of visually see what we're doing, so you don't have to just stare at my at my ironing board there. If you want to know about my ironing boards, they are portable. I make all different sizes, and I have a tutorial on how to make those, and I always leave that link. And so I'm going to go ahead and for sure in the description leave the link, and I talk about my vintage irons and things like that. Okay, that's better, right? Okay, so now I press to set the seam. Then I'm going to open this up. I'm going to roll it, just a quick roll to make sure it's open all the way and there's not any little pleats or anything in there. But one of the reasons I wanted to film this is I wanted to show you my new little notion that is so fun. It's called the Quilter's Water Brush. Okay, and this is what it looks like with the lid off. I just twisted this open right here, and it's filled with water. Okay, put it back on, and then I just, you know, snap the lid on the bottom so that I don't use it, so that I don't lose it, excuse me. But again, this is what the package looks like. And so I apply this. I do not use steam in my iron. That's why I use vintage irons, and I use irons that don't have holes in the plate so that it's not distorting my block. And what I do is right here in this intersection where I want it to lie flat, just on the seam. I'm not turning it over and doing it on the front of the block because I don't want to apply water there, because you apply water in a lot of places in cotton, then it's going to shrink, which it always does. So, but I'm just putting it right here a little bit. I'm just squeezing right there. I don't know if you can see that that's wet there. And then I simply just press. Okay, and just for a few seconds, and then that water dries, and look how nice and flat that is. And then I put the clapper over it, and this is really, has been a game changer for me. I always press my seams open because my blocks lie flatter and are more accurate. But with the addition of just in the, what do I want to say, intersections, or maybe, I don't really want to say problem spots, but because there's so many layers of fabric, that can be a problem to get them to lie flat when you're doing those intersections. And so by doing it this way, then, I know the ironing board's a little bit busy, so I wanted to just show you what that looks like. By doing it that way, you really get it flat. And then as we go along too, I always, whenever I'm piecing, I always use my trim it rulers to just kind of check and make sure that everything's the way it's supposed to be. So this is a 4.5 inch, and this is supposed to measure 4.5 inches, right? And so when I lay it down here, on there, that you can see that I could trim a little teeny bit off of there, and I could trim a little teeny bit off of there to keep it accurate. And so that's not a problem at all. I keep my little, let me see if I've got my rotary cutter right here. Let's see, what have I got? Okay, let me grab my rotary. Hang on. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that, I had it over at my cutting table. All right, so then I just switch this to a little mat right here, and I just turn it to whatever side that I can see the best contrast on. And see how you can line these lines up? And now you can see just that little teeny bit hanging over right there. And then I literally just turn my mat over, and there's just a little bit right there, okay? And so I know it's only a little bit, but if you keep it accurate as you go along, everything's gonna end up, you know, continuing to be accurate. And so that's what I do with that segment, okay? So that's what that looks like. And that's, let me bring this back over. Just gonna kind of show you this corner here. And I always have my design boards here to make sure that I'm laying things out correctly, you know, again. And so now what I want to do is add the easy corner triangles. Now, I could have done these half square triangles, but I like to do, when possible, to add them afterwards if I can. Okay, and so what I need to do is just on each corner, okay, I've got that turned wrong, the background's going to go in that corner just like that, and then I'm going to put an easy corner triangle here, and I'm going to line it up with the edges there, and an easy corner triangle here, and I'm going to sew from here to here. Now you can take and mark your squares if you want a line from corner to corner, or this is where I was talking about with the Seam Sew Easy guide, is I just follow along as I'm sewing on my machine. So pretend here's my machine here, and I've got this all lined up on the edges. I simply just start with my needle right in the corner, and then I keep following this line right here, this center line. And I just keep following that. It's sewing, it's sewing, it's sewing, and I just keep following that line, and that way I get from corner to corner. And that's exactly what that's going to look like. Okay. I hope that kind of helped explain a little bit what I'm doing, but I don't need to mark. Sometimes I do during filming just so you can see exactly which direction I'm sewing and what I'm doing. But I like the fact that, you know, using my Seam Sew Easy guide, it makes it so that I don't have to mark, and it goes pretty quick. Now some block segments make it so that you have to do your easy corner triangles first before you sew them in. I like to do, before you sew the segments together, I should say, I like to do my easy corner triangles last whenever possible, because it adds less bulk and your seams are flipped in the correct direction that they need to be flipped in. It's hard to explain until you've actually done it differently. And then I think, you know, once you've done it this way on a few segments, and I talk about this on a lot of my videos when I piece, once you've done it one way and the other way, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've got these sewn. This is what it's going to look like. I always flip it over and check before I trim. And then I just grab my scissors and I just trim some off here. Okay. And then I also press these seams open as well. And it's just the same method. I just grab my roller and my brush, because now I've got intersections here, or seams that go over each other. You know, before I do that, I like to make sure they're open all the way. Give it a little roll there. Now, it really doesn't take that long to do these extra little things, and this is what makes the difference in your block. And once it becomes a habit for you, it's just something that you do and you don't even think about it. So you can apply the water, you know, all at the same time. Then you can get your iron on there, press that, and I just like to keep that iron on there long enough to, you know, dry that water, which is, I have a nice hot iron. And then I grab the clappers and let that cool. Okay, so these two tools with the iron is really what helps me a lot. Okay, so while that is cooling, let me bring this in here on top. And what I need to do with that is make these two right here, this I'm going to do very last, so it's just kind of sitting here and hanging out. But I need to do angles on this. I'm going to turn this so that you can see both of these at the same time, hopefully. And this is the direction that I want to do easy corner triangles on. So I grab another background, put that there, grab another background square, and put that one there. And I'm going to sew from here to here, that angle right there, and from here to here, that angle. So it's got, you know, when we're finished with that, it will end up that way. So I'm going to be sewing that while that's cooling. again, I'm just following the line on my Seam So Easy guide. And wanting to make sure that I'm sewing the right direction. I also have my little stitchy readers on so I can see when I'm sewing. All right. So that's what that section looks like, all complete, ready and pressed. Okay, just leave that there for a minute. I'm gonna bring these in, set the seams. And I want to make sure that before I trim these off, that they're going the correct direction, and they are. So now I'm just gonna trim these, leaving an approximate 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could use your rotary cutter and your little mat if you wanted to, but I find it's easier for me to, I just grab my scissors and trim it. It doesn't need to be, you know, completely accurate because you've already sewn from corner to corner. Okay, and then I just open these up. Give it a roll. And sometimes when I'm doing this, I kind of like to align where a clapper will fit on there. The clappers are really nice because they're made out of, you know, a good wood that will absorb the heat, and it helps things to lie flat. Now, I don't need to apply my water here on this. I don't have any intersecting seams. Nothing's going to, you know, not lie flat. I don't have a lot of layers of seam allowances. I'm just pressing right there, and then just putting my clapper right there, and that's all I need to let that cool. Okay, and so now that that is cool, I'm going to bring this back over here. I use my design boards all the time just to make sure I have things lying correctly how I need to. Okay, so now the next step is I'm going to sew this to this, and then I'll just continue around. So once again, let me bring this block back in just so you can see what we're doing, what we're going for here. There we go. And again, like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm really glad to be back to filming again. I hope this setup works because there's so many different patchwork blocks that I want to show you, and I just haven't been able to because, you know, just when I sit at my machine, I want to just be able to turn on the camera and show you, but I can't, you know, I'm not a professional filmer. I'm not, you know, I'm just in my sewing room showing you things, and I want to be able to have that freedom to do that. And so if this works, I'm going to be able to film a lot more of my block piecing, so let me know. I had to choose between whether you can look at the sewing machine or whether you can look at my ironing, and ironing is really where I need to show you most of the work, right? What I'm doing and all of the different things. We all know how to run something through a sewing machine with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's nothing, you know, crazy that way. And so hopefully this works out great. Let me know. You know, if you've been watching my videos, that I've been struggling with that since Cassidy is not able to film me anymore. You know, she's married and she's got a family. And by the way, I know I've said this before in other videos and in my blog and things like that, but Cassidy is expecting, so now I'm going to have a granddaughter. So Reed is 2.5, her son, and she's expecting a little girl in November, so we're really excited about that. And she's also designing her own fabric and doing her own sew-alongs and things like that as well. And so, you know, she's got a lot going on, and she is just not able to you know, come over and film me whenever, you know, whenever I called her and said, I'm going to piece something, do you want to run over and film me? So it's just not working out that way. Okay, so there we go. That's what the back looks like, all nice and flat. And I'm just going to sew that to that. Again, I don't want you to just keep looking at my ironing board, so I do want to show you though that when I line these up, this is a good, okay, so because I'm piecing those two together, when I lie them like this from side to side, see, I want those diagonals to line up right there on that point right there, and I can use the pin again. And even though it's a diagonal line, you just pin in on one side of the seam. Okay. Now you can pin all the way through like this, but I just find that it distorts any, I usually, when I'm pinning, I don't do that. I don't do the shovel effect, which is what I call it. I just poke a pin in, okay? I just do my little poke method there that I've always taught, okay? And then I know that those seams, those are the important seams that I want to make sure are lined up. And so by doing that, it really helps out that situation. And I usually have it, you know, in my, just kept here in my little pin cushion, but or on my little sewing mat, I can just poke one right next to my machine in the little sewing mat. It's a quilted table runner, so that I always have one sitting there, but usually I'll have, you know, something just hanging out in there. So anyway, so again, please let me know what you think about this setup, and then I can just kind of chat and give you my tips and tell you what's going on and things like that as I'm sewing, and then show you the pressing. Okay, setting my seams. You don't have to do it on both sides, but just showing. And see how nice that is? That lines up perfectly there by doing it that way. Okay, now I'm just going to open them up, grab my quick press, and I really like to put this just in the intersections and making sure that's open all the way. If your seams aren't open all the way, your block is going smaller and smaller and smaller. And if each segment is smaller and smaller and smaller, then your block is shrunk. And usually that's most quilters' problems, that their block is too small, a little too small from shrinking and things like that. So you just do the best you can by cutting accurately, and then doing your accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then sometimes I press right here if it's just got to sit under the clappers anyway, even though I've pressed that just to make things heavier. And so the wood, smoother, I like to make them heavier by stacking. So I always have 6 of these little clappers. I have long clappers too that I use for bigger blocks or when I'm doing that together. But I just feel like the weight pushes down, and it's just a matter of physics for me, you know, pulls the heat out quicker. All right. And so I especially like to do that when I'm filming, just because I don't leave my blocks under the clapper as long as I normally do when I'm filming. I would probably leave it under until it's cool to the touch. This is almost cool, but it's a little bit warm, but it's flat. And so I just want to be able to show you what I'm doing a little bit quicker. So I normally don't leave it under there. Okay, so that's what that looks like right there. Now, before I add this easy corner triangle, I just want to show you, because this is the fun of quilting. Obviously, there's always different options, but this is what we're going to add next, is this easy corner triangle. But see how it looks completely different if you didn't have that easy corner triangle and it was just like that. That's a cute block too, but I loved adding that extra. It just adds a secondary block. And I just kind of wanted you to visually see that. So now how we're going to do the easy corner triangle is we're just going to lay this on here. Now, can you see that I already marked that? We're going to sew from corner to corner. Okay. Also, I just want to show you how I did mark this one just so that I could show you. And I just want to show you how I mark. I use a little mat. I've got my mechanical pencil, and I've got a couple sizes of these rulers. I've got a 6.5 inch long and a 12.5 inch long. And all I do with that, let's see, because this is red fabric, I'm going to turn that over. I literally just lay it on there and draw a pencil line from corner to corner. Okay, that's all I do. And then I have that line to follow on the machine, or if it's not marked, I just do from corner to corner. So wanted to show you how that goes that way on the machine. Bring that over. Also, before I forget, I mean, I can show you this after, but I could show you before. This should measure 6.5 inches right now. So I take my 6.5 inch trim it ruler, and see how it's nice to line up all of those lines right there. I've got lines going on, and I can see on the blue here, this is my seam allowance, but within this blue, I can see what it's going to look like when it's sewn into the quilt. Okay? And so you can see if you have problems and need to trim anything off, but to me, this looks pretty good. So hopefully when I get this on there, that's going to be the same as well. And sometimes I just have to trim a little teeny bit off from this on the corner, but we'll see how that goes. Also, when I'm sewing this on, I do take a pin and I line up right where it's going to meet that point. I'll show you what I mean. I'll show you what I mean before I trim it. Okay, so what I did was I just have a pin for my pin cushion. And before I got to here, I started sewing from here to here. And before I got there, I just kind of unfolded this and I put a pin right where that point's going to be, right on that point. So I know I'm going to sew not past there, because then I'll sew that point off. Okay, I put a pin exactly where I want to sew. All right, and then I just throw it back in my pin cushion. So now I've pressed that, and I'm going to trim that off by an approximate 1/4 inch seam. And yes, at these larger pieces, I do save. I know that I can get a 2-inch square from here, so I just go ahead and cut squares from those and put those in my square stash. And I always use those, and that's the kind of blocks that I like to show you how to do, how I'm using my scrappy stash and things like that. So again, please, I'm asking you again to please let me know if this is the way I'm able to film. I mean, I'm not asking you to tell me to hire a photographer and stuff like that. That's just not going to happen. I need to be able to have the freedom to just film something if I want to, whether it's midnight or 10 in the morning, or I just get a whim. And you know, that's what I do in my work each day. Is I don't have time because of my designing schedule to, you know, plan all of my filming and things like that. I'd like to just be able to show you what I'm sewing and just have the freedom of turning on the camera, setting up a few lights and saying, this is what I'm doing. And so if it works for you that you just mainly see my sewing area here, and I'm showing you the block in between and things like that, then please let me know so that I can continue on and show you some blocks and film a little bit more often. Now I can always, you know, show my crochet videos and film those and things like that, because that's top down just like this is, and that hasn't been a problem for me. I do have a floss tube coming up pretty soon too, so I can film those because those are top down. But it's just been a problem for me with the sewing, because it's like the last one that I did was just kind of too far away, and I did the camera far away so that you could see my setup here and here. And then I'm like, you don't really need to see my whole setup. You couldn't hear me because the camera was way far away. And I just thought, really what you need to do is not see me sew, but you need to see how I lay out the block, what I'm doing next, what it looks like after, and how I press and how I trim, you know, and square up my blocks. And so basically that's what I'm thinking. So I really hope this works so that I have that freedom to just be able to do what I need to do. Okay, so I've got that lined up there. You have a better view than I do because you have the top-down view. I can see that this is 6.5 inches, so that's great. I can see that this little line is maybe a little bit, whoops, I just shifted it. This little line is not exactly on that seam. Let me see if I can, I just want to make sure there's not a glare. Here, let me stand up and make sure that it's not glaring. Okay, I can see maybe this line is a little bit off from that seam, but that does not bother me because the point is you want this segment to measure 6.5 inches right now. You know, that's the most important part. Okay, let me adjust this camera a little bit. Again, it keeps slipping down. I gotta remember to stand up every once in a while and adjust it here. That's going to take 2 hands. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy and a little seasick. All right. This also, by filming this way, allows me to do that, to make sure that I can just get out of my sewing chair and, you know, see what I need to do next. And all right, so now we've got this, and that's just going to go in the corner there. Okay, so that's good. And now we've got this section left. And so this section right here is just this one. And what I'm going to do is I cannot sew these two together before I add the easy corner triangles. See what I mean? I've got to add the easy corner triangles first and then sew them together. And then this one is basically just flying goose. And so I need to sew an easy corner triangle on one side, press it and trim it before I can sew the other side. So what I'm going to be doing is just laying these easy corner triangles here. Okay, and I'm going to sew from here to here, from here to here on that angle, and then I'm going to sew on the corner here, and I'm going to make sure they're all lined up on the edges. Okay, and I'm just going to follow that line on the Seam So Easy guide, that center line. And I'm just sewing from corner to corner. Again, you can mark yours if you'd like to. Some people are just die-hard markers, and that's what they like to do, and that's great. You do you, because whatever works best for you is going to keep you in the sewing room, right? And keep you playing and having fun. And remember, there's no quilt fleece, and there's always lots of different ways to do things. And I'm not saying my way is the best for you, it's the best for me. And it works the best for me, and that's all that I can show you, and hopefully that will help you out. Okay, I'm going to set the seams, then we're going to trim them. And again, to me, it's just easier to grab scissors than it is to grab my mat and do a rotary and do an exact 1/4 inch when it's already sewn. I don't feel like I need an exact 1/4 inch. It's already sewn. Then I just open them up, roll that. I do not need to place water on these because it's just, there's no intersecting seams yet. I'm going to wait till I sew them together to do that. And then I'm just going to lay these here, open them up, press them, try to keep them in the camera view here. Grab the clappers, put those under one and that one under one. These clappers are the Riley Blake clappers, and I just love them. They're my favorite. I've been using them from day one, and they're amazing. And so the other ones are 12 inches long, and so they work with longer seams when I'm sewing the big block together, all the sections. You know, I use those bigger ones, but you can always layer these next to each other this way as well. And I do that quite a bit. Whatever works, right? Okay, so let's bring this back in. Move that out of the way. So now I can sew these together. Okay, now that those easy corner triangles are on there. And this fabric right here is not directional. It just happens to be that it's going across, but it's not directional fabric. It goes all the way up, faces all different ways. So, you know, you can do that. Now, I pressed a little thing there. Okay, so now I can lay that there and sew that from corner to corner. So I'll quickly do that. And then I'll show you how I use my trim it ruler on these sections, because flying geese, I don't know if you're like me, but they're a lot of times the hardest thing to, you know, get accurate because of those two easy corner triangles and just because of the angles that are on there. Okay, so I'm just pinning these right now, these little angle seams to make sure they line up. When I sew, I'm a starter and a stopper. I don't just start at the beginning and I zip all the way through to the end, because I'm checking my seams as I'm going. I'm taking my time. I wouldn't say that I'm going super duper slow or anything, but I'm just going at the speed that I can to make sure things are accurate. It's not about quickness for me. It's the most important thing to me when I'm doing quilt blocks is to try to get things the most accurate that I can. When you can do that quickly, that's even more of a bonus, but it's not about that for me. Okay, so now I'm opening those up. See how that, by using that double pin here, again, looks like that. That really helps me. So then I open that up, really roll that there. This, I definitely am going to add that water there. And again, it's just at that seam. It's the other seams are already open and flat, and I didn't apply water to those. I didn't need to. And there's no water here. It's just right there, the seam allowance. And I'm going to trim this off. I'm just going to go ahead and do this on top of the clapper, which is what I do quite a bit. I like to stack them on top of each other, but I'm going to do that so you can see what I'm doing. And I opened that just on top of the clapper to show you that I can press on that too, but right where that goes, I want that to line up. Okay, let me grab another clapper and put on top of it. But of course, sometimes I layer them on top of each other too. I can do that when they're small enough, and I can go up. This is my ironing board surface. It's about that big. And so sometimes I go up, right, instead of out. Okay, checking the camera again. See if I can get that angle twisted just a little bit better. My little stand that I have, for some reason, it doesn't want to keep in the position at all times. So I've got my stand here, I've got my big clappers holding it down so it doesn't fall, but I will adjust that the next time I film, is make sure that I get that to stay in the right position at the same time so it's not slipping. Okay, so now I've got this and this, and I just need to sew them together. Okay. Also, before I do this, this is where I would check with my 4.5 inch right there and see if I needed to trim any off. And it looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to leave that like that. Okay. Okay. I'm happy with how this little block and these little segments are turning out. It's been so fun sewing with this Americana fabric. I'll show you here. I'll let you look at the applique blocks that I've got going for this quilt. Give you a different view. Okay. I'll show you those applique blocks in a minute, but press that. And I checked it on my ruler over here, the flying geese, before I did this part, and it looked like I need to trim a little bit off at the top, but I wanted to put it into the segment to make sure before I did that, and so I'll show you how I do that. So on those 3 intersections right there, okay, just making sure that's pressed open. Of course, you can always turn it over and press it from that side. Let me set those there for just a second. And let me grab my 4.5, my 2.5, and my 6.5 inch trim it and just kind of talk to you about this. So what I do is, if it's just my flying geese segment right there, I know it needs to be 2.5 inches tall. Okay, but so that I can, it's not 4.5 wide, but I can put it on, let me put it on the mat so you can see, because that's where I'm doing it if I need to trim anyway. But see how that's sticking up a little bit right there? I know I'm going to need to trim something off, but I just wanted to make sure. So see this little line right there? You want to put this line right here on this angle line right here, and then your 1/4 inch seam allowance sticks up. So see how you can see right there that I need to trim that off on the side a little bit, and just that little bit on the top. And so that's what I'm going to do, just right there, just trimming that little bit off the top and that off the side. Okay, so that's accurate. And then that's why I didn't want to just, it looks like, oh, I need to trim that off, but I just didn't want to eyeball it, because sometimes that needs to stick up a little bit because that's your actual accurate seam allowance. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. I want to make sure I can see this. Yeah, see how that's lined up with that perfectly right there? There's a little teeny bit more sticking up. But what I'm saying is there's still a little bit sticking up there, but that's accurate, meaning that line right there, this is just a little bit short. And I can tell that by laying this on here. And this line lines up with that, and I can see that seam allowance. And see how if I trimmed that off, if I put that on there and trimmed that off that way, what's sticking out just by my eyeball, and said, oh, that needs to be trimmed off, I'm going to be sewing over that point with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's not correct. You want to line this line up with this and the width, and see that your seam allowance is actually, I don't know if you can see that in the light, but you can see under that aqua that it's just a little bit short just from here over, and that's okay. So now I've left it there, and I know, and sometimes I'll grab a pin and just stick it right there in a section that's a little bit short, knowing that this is right and this is wrong, so that when I go to sew it into the block together, that just gives me a little clue. And that's just something that I do, you know, very quickly after each block, as I always use my trim ruler. Sometimes I don't have to trim, but then I know it gives me the assurance that it's correct. And so then I lay that out like that. Okay, and I'm gonna sew it together, but I don't need to do that in front of the camera, just because you know how it sews together. I can show you the back. But when I go to sew this to another block, then I know that that's just a little bit short. Okay, now sometimes you can do a pin, but if you're, another thing that I do is I don't always use a pin, because I'm worried that if I'm keeping these blocks for several weeks and things like that, that my pin will fall out and then I won't know. And a lot of times I can just grab, let me show it to you, I can just grab my washi tape and put a little bit of washi tape right there, and then that's not going to fall off and it's not going to hurt the fabric, and then I know why that's there, and I can just remove it and it doesn't leave any residue. Okay, and so that's what this block will look like. It's just a 9 patch. I'm just going to sew this row together, this row together, the last row together, and then just sew the 3 rows together, just like any 9 patch. Let me show you the back of these blocks again. I just press from the back, all of the seams open. And then after I do that, after I sew that together, I use my 16.5 inch trim it ruler right here. It's hard to see that glare, all the lights you can see, but use that and I can trim those up. But that's what all of those blocks look like. And just wanted to show you the applique blocks. Let me bring the sew along guide in, and well, here, let me just take this quilt. This is what the quilt's going to look like. Okay, this is the Sweet Land sew along quilt. It's 88 by 88 square. This is the wide back fabric that I'm using. And so these are the blocks here. I've already done the tutorial for all of the intersections. Next week I'll be showing you, how to do a few segments from the pieced border. So that's what that quilt looks like. So I did 5 blocks. I did block 1 today, and all of the other ones are finished. Of course, I worked ahead, and the 4 applique blocks are the same as the piece blocks in the way that they're the exact same blocks, but it's just scrappy Americana fabric. The fabric is just dispersed throughout. Okay, so that's what that quilt looks like. So let me show you. I'm just going to show you each of these blocks by unlayering them. I think they're so fun. And I love the little scallop on the border on the bottom there. See how you can kind of see that way. And then that's the last one of this. And that's all going to be trimmed up after I've appliqued. I haven't appliqued yet. I've shown you how to do this block 1 on my blog. And they're just glue basted down. And then I'll be either hand appliquing or machine appliquing, whichever you want to do is great. I actually haven't decided yet. I'll probably end up doing hand applique, but either looks great. And then I'll trim them up. Okay, so that's my blocks. That's the sew along. And I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. It's kind of, again, I'm still kind of trying to test it out, but if I know that the camera will work, if I, have it here on my ironing and just tell you step by step what I'm doing, chat with you while I'm actually sewing the seams, and then showing you, each step as I go along, I think it will give me a lot more freedom to just sew with you when I'm in my, sewing room every day and just whipping a few scrappy blocks out. So let me know what you think, and thank you for joining me, and I will chat with you later.